Well, hey YouTube, Petey Twofinger back with my Cork 45 guitar. This is the guitar that's responsible for all of the songs, all the music you hear coming out of this channel. I keep this guitar at arm's length over by the love seat. And whenever I feel inspired, I will grab that thing and I will plunk around on it till I get an idea. And then I will film that using this little Logitech webcam and the software. And I'll label that original composition, and then save that for later when it's a more appropriate time for me to use the drum software and finish the song, write a B part maybe. So that's the secret to how I'm able to write as much music that I do, is having something to record those ideas. Oftentimes we'll be doing something with the family band or the duo, and all of a sudden it'll come to me and I'll have this flashback of me. I'm 18 years old, it's 1985, and I'm playing that same piece of music sitting on my bed. So here I didn't have a way to to save these ideas and turn them into a thing with a beginning, middle, and end, but they were still floating around back there in my memory, and they came out many years later without me putting two and two together and having that full realization that, hey dummy, this is an old piece. So depending on how prolific you are, you may not want to film and keep those for later. Now this guitar, I want to talk about what I did yesterday, which was some repair work. It's got brass on it. You can see that even the fret markers are brass, and I polished those. So for polishing brass, I use these emery boards, and I also use some steel wool, and lemon oil for the neck. And about a year ago, no, it's got to be, this is like 2 or 3 years ago, I did a review for Orphe brand. They're 99¢ or $1.49 for a set of 6 strings, and people were saying, oh, my low E, that string breaks with Orphe's. You always see that, Orphe string break, Orphe string break, they break, they break, they break, they break. Well, I had that on, I don't know who that is, if it's Diodario rep or who was saying that, because they don't break. I had this set on for well over a year. I've used Orphe strings for a long time, and I've never had an issue with any of the strings breaking. Now, I also use a 0.60 millimeter Jim Dunlop nylon pick. You can hear that. And then here is something like, you hear that difference? You're going to break a string with that. So and I'm old. I don't get like worked up. I'm not 18, like at my peak of my prime or whatever. So that's why I don't break strings, is because I've mellowed out. And I would really like to know, to those people who my Orphe string breaks, name me a few of the CDs in your music collection. Because if it's Cannibal Corpse or Jane's Addiction, yeah, we can understand why you're breaking strings. Now, this is one of these eBay cheapie to avoid. See this indentation for your thumb? It's a thick indentation. I really like the way this pick feels and performs. It's a 0.7 millimeter, which you'd think it would be similar to that nylon, but it's not. This is hard plastic, like the stuff they make CD cases out of, and it's brittle. So these split. They split down the middle, so I can't recommend these. I love the way they feel, and for playing loud, defined, lower notes. And isn't that great how these are low notes? And this is a high note for you. Everyone else does it that way. So for, playing those low notes, thicker pick is going to give you more attack and more sustain. So I've been playing in that style lately, and I've been trying to use a thicker pick for that. Who knows, maybe I will break an Orphe. Now, in messing with this guitar, like I've had Duncan Selects in it, because the original pickups died. Okay. These are Invader clones that have ceramic magnets. I paid like $20 for the pair. I really, if I was going to do anything with this, well, my dream thing would be to put a tremolo bar in it and a locking nut. But would I want to make this guitar headless? No. Look at the headstock. It's like a little shrimp fork. Now this, where it says Court 45, that I've painted that in there, and I do cut that brass. I will use an abrasive to polish it because it gets cloudy looking. And this nut here is brass. The bridge is brass, but the saddles are not. They're a real hard alloy. So I would like to get some brass saddles for it. You can see, if I didn't mention that already, that the fret dot markers, the inlays, are also brass, and you polish those as well. Now, this guitar, I had played with the adjusting the truss rod. The frets are gone. I had to do it. This guitar was found in a dumpster. And thank you very much to my younger brother Bjorn for gifting this to me. This is like my favorite guitar. Out of all my stuff, this is the one that I just grab and play all the time, and I've written so much music on this. I don't play it live because it's not a great performer. It needs new frets, and it needs a pro setup job. Now, one of the things with these frets being gone, because I had it done, they recrowned them, and they probably should have replaced them. That's what they probably should have done, because there's like nothing left on it. But it's a great playing and sustaining guitar, and I want to keep this around, so I'm going to have to do something. But what I had found was, even with messing with the truss rod adjustment and the bridge adjustment, the saddle adjustment, I was still, when I would fret out on like the second and fourth frets on the high strings, those ones, the high ones, I would get a little bit of fret buzz. And that was enough to drive me to put a shim in the nut, to raise the actual string height up by shimming out, moving this point up. So I used a Coke can for that. And then also in tuning, I found that I was often popping these strings because nothing would happen. You would tune. So this nut is improperly cut. This nut would need to be filed with the proper file, the exact size for 9-gauge strings, and that's not going to happen. So what I did was I made my own nut sauce. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can use 3-in-1 oil, Vaseline, and naphtha, which naphtha is just Ronson lighter fluid. So if you have all three of those, you could make that and stir that up. What you're going to want to do is try to get the Vaseline to break down and mix with the other three ingredients. So how I saw it done, and I don't know, it seemed like this was wrong. It was oil first, then Vaseline, then add the naphtha. Where I would think I would go with naphtha, then Vaseline, and mix those two, then add the oil and mix that. But however you mix the stuff, that's what you apply to up here. Now, that sounded a bit messy to me. What I used was an X-Acto hobby knife and a chapstick, an off-brand chapstick, and I would just cut a little amount and pack that into the nut, and then apply graphite, powdered graphite to that. Mix that up in kind of a little soup and repack it down in there. And I put that mixture all across all 6 nuts, and then carefully, when I applied that in there, and they would slide through, I would push it back with a Q-tip and then clean it up with the Q-tip. So that made the tuning action on this work really well. I've never done this before. I've done it with the graphite, but something with using the graphite and the chapstick was really what made this work great. So the tuning works like it should more than getting hung up and having to wiggle above the nut, and then all of a sudden it pops and it's sharp. The note is way sharp. So what I found was, for tuning this, you were almost better every time you moved the tuning key of wiggling above the nut to make sure that it was actually sliding through. So that's one way you can do it. if you really want to get heady with this stuff and you want to tune one-handed, you don't want to be all then you could go ahead and try to make your own nut sauce, like I said. But ideally, I think what would be good would be to use a bulk amount of chapstick. Like, take a shot glass, put the chapstick in it, and just keep microwaving that on 3 seconds and stopping it until it turns into a liquid. Or use a heat gun. If you've got a heat gun, put some gloves on, get your shot glass, or better yet, a camping salt shaker would be good to use, and heat that stuff up with a heat gun till it turns to a liquid. Add the powder graphite into that. This is like chunks of graphite. It depends on where you get it. If they sell that at an art store. I've got a bottle of it, like a peanut butter jar of graphite. That's really what I should use. I need to get that out and just do what I'm talking about, is make a thing of it. So you would have the liquid wax, the beeswax of the chapstick, and you would mix in that amount of graphite and then pour that into a Carmex container, a little Carmex jar. And then, like I said, use a hobby knife. Once that cools and solidifies, you would apply it with a hobby knife, and less is more is what you're going to be looking at for that. So that's my Big Ben's nut sauce tip. There's 2 different formulas you can try. Let me know if it works out for you. If you have any guitar that you notice when you're tuning it, nothing happens, and then all of a sudden it's sharp, that's because it's grabbing at the nut, and that means your nut is improperly cut. So either buy a set of nut files that has a file that's the same size of the string gauges you're using, and carefully file that, which I don't like the way that sounds. That's StuMac, that company that they charge you $60 for a $4 set of files. Anyway, with guitars, you'll find that at some point, like if you end up with a guitar that came out of a dumpster or someone gave it to you, there's a reason for that. And that's probably that it needs the neck shimmed, or it needs to be shimmed at the nut. So you need to remove the neck and put a shim to correct the neck angle. Like if you look and the strings are like they're real big gap in between here, and there's no gap over here, that means you need to raise the angle of the neck, and that's a shim that you put in at the bottom of the neck pocket. In my case, what I saw was it was low, the action was low here, and it was buzzing out down through here, so I had to raise the nut up. So I took a Coca-Cola can and I used a big hobby knife with a carpet cutter blade, something like this. Again, thanks to my little brother Bjorn for showing me his knife. I went and bought one for myself. It's got a thick carpet cutter blade. That's what I use to cut the Coke can. That's not why my fingers are all tore up. They're tore up from taking apart lithium-ion battery packs. And they don't use wires to connect those batteries. They use a thin strip of metal, as that can carry current more efficiently. And that thin metal tends to really, it's worse than the Coke can material. That's what got me. That's why I'm all... And I have ingrown fingernails. I cut 14 out, and I forgot 3 that I had to do surgery on myself, which just entitles using a striping the side of your nail where it's growing in, striping that a few times on the top, and then flipping a fresh blade upside down and going in and cutting that all the way down, and then using a needle nose pliers to rip it out. So that's not fun. If you see me with taped up fingers, that's what that's usually about, is my ingrown fingernails. So, because oh man, do they hurt. I can't play with them. Like today, I got a chunk missing out of my finger from here, from that battery, and there's a big split on one of my other fingers that needs to be cut out. The dead skin needs to be cut out, so I shouldn't be playing. Now, for cutting the shim for the Coke can, you want to start squared. My initial cut that I did with the scissors, it's at an angle, and yours probably is going to be too. The best way to do it is to be a man and don't worry about being cut so much, and wear gloves. Okay? Just be careful. Don't cut the whole can apart. Just cut a chunk out, and it will have that first angle cut. Whatever you got to do, if you want to lay it flat on a piece of wood and score it with a razor, and cut a square out of it. But you need to start with it squared off, so you could trim that off. Me, I just kept trying to cut pieces, and they were all angly and starting skinny and getting too wide. Once I actually started from a square block, my stock was squared off, then it became a little easier for me to cut squared off strips. So when I got a strip that was the right diameter, I cut it exactly a little bit over and kept shaving it down, because you don't want it sticking out on the sides. You don't want this piece of aluminum a little bit wide, because it's gonna cut you like a razor on your hands. So when I got it flush, I also used these little Trimmy Buddy scissors. These are made by Singer, the people that do the sewing machine. So I used these basically you could think of the strip like this, and I cut across at an angle here, across at an angle there, and the same thing on the other sides, just to give me a little leeway to make it sure that it's inside of the actual nut. So when I got that cut and dropped it in there and it fit and looked good, and I could place the nut in there and everything looked good, I whipped up a batch of epoxy that sticks to metal and wood. And this isn't like JB Weld epoxy. I'm going to be able to remove this real easily with a little emery board. But it was enough to hold that thin piece of aluminum in place and give me a little more north. By north, I mean when that epoxy dries, it's going to give me, not a millimeter, but about a half. So there is the truss rod. The nut for the truss rod runs through there. So you don't want to put any glue on that, obviously, just on the right and left side, and then the right and left on the aluminum. Glue that in there. And then when that was dried, I sanded the bottom of the nut and then applied the epoxy to the nut and applied it to the aluminum. Let that dry for about 5 minutes and then compressed that, and then I went ahead and put the strings on. Now at that point I found that I needed to put some more tension to bow the neck a little bit back, so I had to crank this a little bit, a couple quarter turns, and then now I'm a little high. I raised my bridge saddles and they're going to have to come down. So this nut is in there. This guitar kind of stinks because you have to loosen 3 of the strings to pull the truss rod cover off. So I need to loosen those up, pull this cover off, just leave it off, put it in a baggie and leave it off, and keep this 5mm wrench here, and just keep playing around with this until I get it exactly where I like it, between the tension on the truss rod and the height of the saddles. Right now it's a little high it's a little bit high at the top fret. So that tells me I probably want to lower these saddles a little bit and then maybe put even a little bit more relief or less relief. Maybe I have too much. Yeah, maybe it's too much. I think it is too much. I need to let some tension off of this and then drop these is what I need to do. But like I said, the initial thing that led me to the point of realization that I needed to shim the nut was I had string buzz on like the 2nd and 4th fret of the lower strings. These meaning lower, not that. That's a higher string. I know it's lower on the guitar, but this is music, so I think in musical terms. I try to say it the other way all the time, and then I'll slip. So, yeah, the higher strings, those ones. Fret buzz at the 2nd and 4th fret. So this is something we need to consider, is our nut set right? And in the case of your guitar, if you don't have a bunch of guitars and you're not a handyman, of course you would just take it in and have the guy look at it and he'll give you a bill. Me, in my case, I can't afford that, so I need to watch YouTube tutorials and experiment by doing this myself. So I thought this was a worthy video because of my nut sauce recipes, that fixed my tuning issue. And I also, by using that Coke can with the tip of some epoxy to hold it in place, because we don't want to remove our strings and then have the nut go flying off and our little custom cut piece of aluminum to go bye-bye as well. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Whatever you can use, if you want to use some sticky tack or whatever your glue of choice that's going to kind of hold the metal. The idea is that we don't want to permanently like weld it in there with a bunch of glue. Just something to hold it in place. So super glue would be what you would want to use. You know, just a dot. So definitely shimming our nut and our neck pocket is something that you come to a point where you're going to need to do eventually if you're playing around with this guitar collection game. And this may not have been the greatest video, but I just wanted to show off my cool. How cool is that? This Chord 45, just the coolest guitar. All right, you guys, thanks for joining me. And if you have any recommendations of a real informative, good video on this topic, let me know. All right, you guys, take care.